Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 275. Here we go. Have you ever been afraid of what might happen if you accomplish your goal? That's right. Have you ever been fearful of succeeding at something you really wanted to do? Before you dismiss that as not a thing, it's actually a real fear and something we plan to talk about today. You've just joined us for part 4 and the final installment of our book discussion of Finish by Jon Acuff, with our special guest host, Mr. Jason Gass. But before we address the question about those fears, let's recap how we got here. In part 1 of our discussions in episode 272, we discussed the reasons for choosing this book to review on the show and how working toward our goals and finishing them is a battle with perfectionism. We talked about the reasons people stop working toward their goals and how cutting our goal in half can actually give us a better chance of hitting the goal. In part 2 of our discussions in episode 273, we talked about getting more time to work on your goal by choosing what to bomb, using our motivations to make working on a goal fun. And then how can we avoid the distractions that are definitely going to arise when we're working toward a goal? In part 3 of our discussions in episode 274, we talked about secret rules and those false assumptions we might not know we have that can keep us from reaching our goals, and how to use data to show progress toward our goal even if it's not perfect. This week, as we kick off part 4, we'll return to the topic of data. How can we collect data on our environment and the way in which we're working and compare that with our successes and failures to achieve goals to shape our successes in the future? And then we'll talk about perfectionism's last stand. What are the final hurdles that perfectionism can put in our way to trip us up as we're only steps from the finish line and completing our goal? Let's get you to the final installment in our book discussion of Finish by Jon Acuff.
There was an interesting section next, which is learning about how you work well, I think, which was a little bit more of a focused, like applied example of answering the 10 questions about, the last time you tried a goal and whether you were successful or not. The next section after that was working on a plane. Again, hey, I've heard from a bunch of people that, how they got so much work done on a plane, and why is that? Maybe it's not, for you, it's not a plane, but it's something else. Like for Nick, it was working at a coffee shop. And what is it about that environment that led to success for you? So again, it was brainstorming about a plane, but it was like, hey, you can only bring a certain amount of work and get it actually done on a plane. Maybe it's white noise. Maybe it's the internet connection isn't actually good enough for you to get distracted by other stuff on the internet. There's a well-defined deadline. You're going to take off at this time. You're going to land around this time. Nobody knows you on the plane. So, there's nobody that's going to judge you on burying your head or try to strike up a conversation or whatever, right? So the interruptions are going to be less. And those were just 5 examples of brainstorming about why this specific group of people found that this specific environment, worked well for getting work done, for accomplishing a goal. of making progress on a project. So, Nick, you mentioned working in a Starbucks. It's like in a Starbucks, you're surrounded by that scent of ground coffee all the time, which maybe, tickles a pleasure center for you. And there is this kind of like background chatter that might act like white noise. You don't have a television to walk to.
It's unlikely that anyone I know is there.
Right. So there's any number of things.
Only one screen.
Right. Maybe pulling out that stuff and trying to recreate it. If it is going to a Starbucks or maybe it's like, I don't know, finding a coffee scented candle and a soundtrack of like background chatter and coffee being ground.
This ties into a lot of the principle of like the day before vacation. I can't remember if it was part of this book or something else I've read in the past. It's amazing when we have a vacation planned of how much we can accomplish that week before. You focus, you have to get all this work done. You want to get it done because then you go on vacation, you can relax. You're not worrying about it. Things are done. Whereas if we weren't going on vacation, you get stopped by the water cooler, or when we were in the office, we go in and we start having this chit-chatting. But when you're on vacation, it's like, hey, sorry, John, I need to get back to work. I got my deadlines to meet. It's amazing that just that simple mentality of when we know we're trying to accomplish in a particular period of time, we prioritize a lot differently.
Yeah. So coming up on that deadline, we know where we are. We have to make adjustments and deflect certain things, right? Yeah, that's a really good point. It actually reminds me of something that was earlier on about data. If you're watching runners and you ask, somebody who's running, how's the race going? And they say, no idea. I don't know how fast I'm going, how many miles I have left, or even which way to go. I'm just going to run faster to fix that problem, right? It's like you have to use data to make adjustments. And sometimes the adjustment that you're making is like, because I know I have this deadline, I'm coming up on it, and this is where I am in the progress. I can't like stop and engage in, small talk. I'm going to have to deflect, sorry. Or whatever adjustment that you have to make.
And I think it's a good point that capturing and taking action on data doesn't mean you built a spreadsheet. The runner can't do that.
Right.
When I was talking about, I find it difficult to take data captures, it's the ones that are like long-term tracking that get me the most.
Sure, yeah.
But certainly, everybody does some data analysis, as you mentioned, Jason, when they have to prioritize, what do I do, what do I not do? That may or may not be, I've written something down and tracked it over time and done a ton of analysis. I think there's like a misconception that in order to capture data and take action on it, it has to be hard. Maybe that's my secret rule.
Now we have Apple Watches. It all connects, Garmin watches that connects to Apple Health. It's a piece of device that does all the tracking for you and uploads it. And so, yeah, I think that's one of your secret rules is if you want to collect data, but you need to find a way that's easiest as possible where it's collected automated as much as possible.
Or Nick, address your rule that like data collection, in order for it to be valid, has to be difficult. I don't know if that's what your secret rule was, but whatever the secret rule is.
That's what it feels like. I mean, maybe I just need to collect data from a Starbucks. That's it.
You can get that from your app that you scan, right? You can export that. Like meals, like how many meals did I make? Well, I know that I got 3 meals from Green Chef delivered this week. I know exactly how many meals I got this past month. I don't have to go anywhere very far to get that data. How many times did I go to McDonald's? Well, I can go to my debit card and type in MCD and it'll find it real quick. So I think part of that collecting the data side of things is that, okay, what's the easiest way of collecting that? Is it steps? Well, that can be calculated just by your phone in your pocket. You don't even have to go get a watch for that. And is it going to be 100% accurate? Maybe, maybe not. But is it better than collecting no data?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Are you saying it won't be perfect?
Yeah. If it says you walked 4,600 steps and in true reality, you only did 4,520, it's more of like, hey, did I progress further along?
Yeah. And giving the Heisman to the thought that like, oh, if it's not perfect step count, then it doesn't count. And it's not even worth doing.
I think I have double secret rules on both fronts there. Like, it has to be thorough and it has to be perfect.
It's actually a quote I'm reading in the notes here that falls right along with you, Nick. It says, don't wait until the squirrels come home. Data kills denial, which prevents disaster. Perfection will tell you that your data must be complicated. If you dare to gather some, it will have you tracking every ounce of water, second at a time, vowels used in the book you're writing. Don't. He even talks about keeping the data simple so that you collect data, but it doesn't once again consume you and distract you from completing your goal.
I have some work to do there.
Well, we're getting close to the end of this book. We got one chapter left.
So chapter 8, the last chapter, the day before done. This is something that Nick touched on. As you're getting close to accomplishing the goal, things will crop up that will be distracting and cause you to maybe not hit your target. Why do starters have a hard time with the day before done? The day before done is terrifying. So it's like the last chance for perfectionism, this externalization of perfectionism to win by distracting us or causing us to fear accomplishing the goal.
It was interesting. I think it was within this chapter, but we allow our goals to define us. And that's where I think a lot of people don't finish. Maybe your goal was to be the PTA president. And now you are the president. Your term is up. Your goal was to be the president, but now you are now defined that you're the president of this organization. What are you next, right? When you move on or when your term ends. And I thought that was a very powerful point because we always talk about, I'm working on this project and this is how I'm moving along. But when you complete it, what are you going to talk about? You're no longer defined by that task or that goal or that project.
Or that job.
Yeah. I think they talk about it when you retire. You're defined like you were this person. You were a president of this company. You were your own business owner. And then when you retire, well, you're no longer that, what you would think of VIP or VP. No, you're now defined as what? Someone that drinks coffee and goes golfing every day. People get caught up in that.
Very true. Yeah. So there's 3 explicit fears that he calls out. The fear of what happens next, which is exactly what you're touching on. The fear that it won't be perfect when you, quote unquote, accomplish the goal, and the fear of what now. And there's, quite a few anecdotes here. The one that really hit me hard was the person who switched majors a bunch of times in college and then intentionally failed the final. Transferred schools was just on and all about is, probably a combination of these fears, right? So I think for people who are quitting on day 4 or day 5 of a 90-day goal, maybe that's something that you don't realize that you might face, towards the end, but it is a very real thing. And Nick, I think you called it out. Oh, I'm almost done editing this episode and now all these ideas for new episodes and tasks that I could do to, kick off these other things
we should do a whole episode on this thing that we just hinted on in this discussion. Yeah.
Not that those aren't important, to record, I think, as Jason pointed out, but you can't pursue those things at the cost of actually accomplishing the goal that you're so close to accomplishing.
For sure. I think the fear of what's next aligns so perfectly well back to, I think it was episode 19, Dreaming in Bands, John, where you're talking about you got your dream job and now you have to figure out, well, what do I do now? How do I figure out what I should do now that I've accomplished this thing? I don't know. Because maybe you worked so hard at it that you just never really thought about it. And that's okay.
Yeah. You have to understand what's the next step. And just because you accomplish this one thing doesn't mean that there isn't a next step.
Even for the person who retired, like Jason said, just because they were a VP or very successful business person, it doesn't mean that they couldn't have a what's next in retirement that would be a good goal for them. Be a very different one.
I know people that they retired and now they have the free time to go work in all these organizations that they couldn't volunteer at before, because time is now a valuable asset that they now own. Like you said, ideas start to pop up right before you finish a goal and it can distract us. And the important thing is, hey, write these awesome ideas of and keep that excitement, but put it off to the side so you can finish what's at hand, finish the goal, right? That's the name of the book. And then you have this list of everything. And I think it's very common where writing it down is the biggest thing. We talk about writing down goals, but just writing down things in general. The human mind is awful for long-term retention. And we see this all the time. My wife and I see restaurants. We want to get outside of our norm, right? We want to get outside of our few mile radius going to the same restaurant. We see and hear about all these other new restaurants that are just down the road. We don't write it down in a place that we will remember. And then, of course, we finish. If you finish something, then you're like, oh, what are we going to eat today? I don't know. Where's that place that we talked about a month ago? And so I think the really important thing is just writing things down in a place that you can refer back to.
Sounds like you're saying we should track data.
It's either data or a journal. And physical medium I feel is very important. We always seem to put it in our phones or on a text and notepad and on a computer. There's the correlation of remembering, and when you physically take something and you write it down physically, something happens in our brains and you're more likely to then remember it.
Yeah. Or you use a system, like you store it close to where you need to make that decision. I would say the 20 years ago example of this is the drawer full of takeout menus. It's right in the kitchen. It's in the same spot. You pull it open and you go, oh, hey, I remember eating here. Oh, we circled this thing and we put a star by it. So I know that we liked it. Here's the menu of the place that we never got to, but we walked in, we grabbed the takeout menu and we brought it home, we put it in. And now, here's the idea. So personally, like I use Google Maps that way. If somebody tells me about a place, I'm already opening the maps. I'm adding it to a specific list of places I want to go. And then in the notes section, I write down who told me and when. So now I have this like giant like list of places that I know that I want to go. And, it happens all the time. Like somebody will call me up and say, hey, let's meet for lunch. And I go, where are you? Here's where I am. Halfway between us or 1/3 in each direction. I open up Google Maps and here's this like all these flags of places that I want to go. And I can just pick one, right? It's super powerful. Whatever system that you use, you just make sure that you record it and you record it in the place in a way that you can actually use it. Whether it's putting it on a specific list, of paper list of places that I would love to eat with my partner, organized by city or digital Google Maps or whatever, system, you can still do the takeout menus in the drawer. That's totally valid.
I think that ties into our last chapter about data and collecting that data.
Absolutely.
The next section, he talks about, we talk about those 3 questions that you brought up, the 3 final fears of perfection. He goes on to like, well, how do you get past that? So I think we should look into that a little bit.
Yeah, there is 2 contrasts. Like one is the thing that you can't schedule, which is a crisis. Like, oh, you have a health crisis, which, gets you on a health kick or, gets you to refocus. I think the person that he talked about who never finished college degrees had like a life-threatening experience and went back, and that created clarity that this was something that they wanted to get done. But, the point of accountability is much more controllable, right? Than having a life crisis. So having, that person that you're bouncing those things off of and you're talking to, and I think he also warns against having a guru. The joke that he makes is you can't have Morgan Freeman like summarizing like the decisions that you're making for you in Morgan Freeman voice all the time. Either get busy leaving or get busy dying. Like that was the quote from Shawshank Redemption, right? If you have a friend who helps you to break that habit that you have of abandoning, then having that person just objectively make that call. Like I think the interesting example that was used was the artist who would get work done, create a piece of art, drawing or whatever, and then just shred it, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm done with that and it's not perfect and it's intermediate. It's not even important. I'm just going to shred it. And then the friend goes, stop shredding the art that you're creating. Oh, okay. I didn't even think like maybe that was important. It's like, yeah, okay. So now I'm not shredding and I can look at my progress and maybe get somebody else to come in and check the things that I need to make changes on, not just myself. Hey, you don't need Morgan Freeman to do that for you.
So I think it's very important to have that accountability, that friend that you can reach out and call them and have them kind of give that perspective. I have several very good friends that have been with me since I can remember, since elementary school, high school, through college, that they won't beat around the bush. They know you better than you sometimes, and they can tell you without hurting your feelings that, hey, you need to stop this, that you need to focus, or whatever it is, you need to stop. You need that outside perspective sometimes. The next question I thought was very interesting is, what are you getting out of not finishing? Because it's an opportunity cost. If you're not finishing this goal, you're getting something out of it versus what you would get out of it if you did finish. And I think gets back into that reflection. We have to have the self-reflection of, why am I doing this to myself? Why are we self-sabotaging ourselves especially when they're talking about the stage? This is when you're at that 90%, that 99.5% done. You only have that. You have to just literally put your foot over the finish line to complete whatever you're doing. But for some reason, you don't want to step across that checkered line.
There were 3 things that were posited. Again, I don't think that they were meant to be exhaustive, but 3 examples of things that maybe you could be getting out of it. The first was control over the outcome. If I try, I might fail. If I never try, I at least know that the outcome, I had control over it. The second was praise for being a martyr. I have this goal, but I'm abandoning for this other thing, whatever that other thing is. And the praise for abandoning that goal. And then third was lowered expectations from other people. What if you succeed and now people expect you to be able to do stuff?
You set the bar so high now that the next time you do a goal, you have to hit that bar just as high.
The sentence I should have highlighted, but was, I'd rather occasionally surprise people with what I can do rather than build up a reputation of success. And that is such an interesting attitude to voice, or in this case, write down. So again, those 3 aren't exhaustive, but there might be something, that's personal to whomever is reading this book or, contemplating their perfection, to understand, what is it that I'm getting out of it? Maybe the thing that you're getting out is being able to binge watch all the Netflix that you want. And is that important to you?
Or lack of accountability. This is just your way of not holding yourself accountable for something.
Which is a type of variation on control of the outcome, right? Mm-hmm. My outcome is I'm not accountable for anything.
Right. Well, how do we put a bow on it, guys?
Yeah, one of the things that I want to mention structurally is that each of these chapters has a list of actions at the end. So not only are the thesis statements and their intermediate thesis statements about each chapter fairly simple and fairly clear, even though they are surrounded by anecdotes, there are actions to take at the end of each chapter. So each chapter has a nice little bow, wrapped around it for you to go forth and do better. So I guess if we're wrapping up our discussion of this book, my reaction again was that, I felt very positive, and I believed, the points of this book. It didn't claim to be exhaustive. It didn't claim that every single part of it was backed up by a major psychological study, but, it all worked for me. It made me, realize some things about myself. And I think, moving forward, I'm incorporating quite a few of these practices and these frameworks into my own life. So I don't know about you guys. Similar reactions? Different? Jason, I know that, this impacted you positively enough to bring it to us and say, hey, we should have an entire podcast episode, or 2, like discussing this.
I'm addicted to buying discounted books at half-price books. I bought it for $3, and it's definitely one of the most impactful books that I've ever read, because I'm awful at starting. I was awful at starting things, but never finishing them. And when I read this book, and like I said, the format's real simple. It's easy flowing, but it really did speak to me. I mean, so much that I started talking to everyone else about it. I started buying books for people and giving them to them because I recognized that it could help them. This is my second reading. I just completed last month. I've now implement a lot of these policies. I have definitely, I can see in the last year, accomplished a lot more goals than I have done in the past. It definitely got me completing a lot of projects that I had gone on. I mean, to the point where friends were asking, hey, are you ever going to complete that? And it got so to the point where I'm like, I don't even want my friends asking if I'm going to complete that job or project, because I'm tired of hearing about it. But it definitely made me realize what I thought were faults and problems that I thought were just solely within me are very common to everybody else. And the rules that he puts in the books are really easy ways to implement so that you can start accomplishing a lot more of the goals that you set for yourselves.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mentioned I love the way he writes. It was very easy to consume, especially on Audible. But for me, I think it was more like, wow, I'm going to be a lot more mindful of these things because I can 100% identify all of them, as we've heard, as we went in my own life. And if I can at least identify them as a first step, I can do something about it as a next step. I can tell you there were a couple of tasks that had been on my whiteboard in here for months. And after I read this book a couple times, I'm like, I am doing those. And they're not on my board anymore. So I was really happy about that. And they weren't hard things. They were just there way too long.
I would also say that it's presented in a very, I guess we've said this before, but easy to digest.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some things, do this, you're going to be able to move forward a little bit better. But at the same time, a lot of these things have depth and you could dive in deep and get granular on any one of these things, like choosing what to bomb. That's prioritizing things in your life. It's a brief, easy to digest chapter that gives you really good ideas on how to do things. But, you could spend the rest of your life perfecting how to reprioritize things there's a lot of potential, additional thought that could go into each one of those things, right? So I don't think that we should pretend that it's exhaustive.
Yeah.
And the author doesn't pretend that it's exhaustive. But it is such a good kickstart to this entire genre of accomplishing tasks and goals. I thought it was so valuable.
You're never going to finish getting better at finishing.
Nice. Jason, I am so glad that you brought this book to our attention. Really appreciate it. I think it'll be a jumping off point to a lot of things that we do. And maybe, Nick, here's an idea for you as you're editing this episode. Maybe we should do like a book every 6 weeks or so.
Then it would be a book review podcast.
No, not. We won't turn it into something that we do all the time. It's just I think that there's like some cool books out there, and we'll drop in. I don't know, once a year, twice a year. You know what? How about once every 2 years?
It's probably been that long since deep work.
This was a lot of fun. And, Nick got me into, so he's the one who convinced me to start talking about Toastmasters at some conferences. And so I talked about the benefit of Toastmasters and how it's benefited my career. So I submitted it and got accepted and spoke about it. And at the last conference, I had just finished reading this book and talked to Nick. I said, I think I want to do a 45-minute long speech about, the main topics in this book. And so it's been great to force me to go back through all the notes and reread it again and kind of get the high topics. It's real easy to talk about this for 2 hours, as you can see. I think a lot of these things really resonate with people. I've read a lot of books about goal settings, and none of them actually have come to like a good framework that I felt like this book brought to the table. And it's not a complicated framework. It's very simple principles, but I had never thought of them in the past. And I had never seen these type of principles in the past in any other book. It was always like the SMART principle. I've seen that in so many different ways. How many times have we created those SMART goals and we still failed at being successful?
Thank you so much, Jason, for your willingness to make the suggestion and come and guest host it with us. It was a great discussion.
Just for a fun fact, this is the first ever podcast I've ever done. So this was a learning experience for me.
Now that you've listened to at least one show in this book discussion series, do you think you're more or less of a perfectionist than when you started listening? I actually think I am more of a perfectionist than I thought when we started that discussion, as you probably heard. Have you decided to collect more data to help show your progress toward a goal? I think that we can look at the data collection In another way, in the same way we looked at our work environment, are there methods of data collection that have worked for you in the past? Ways to do it that make you more motivated to keep doing it? Or ways you have done it and couldn't sustain it? I think we can analyze it in a very similar way so that the method we're using really works for us and we're shaping that path to success, even in data collection, without letting it become a distraction. I'll also say this fear of success or the fear of accomplishing a goal is an interesting one. And I think this can affect people if they were to hear about or start to pursue a job opportunity that's really exciting at a time where maybe they were happy where they were. Could fear of actually getting the new job keep you from getting it? Does that stop you from even applying? Because once you apply, there's no guarantee you're going to get the job. But if you don't apply, you definitely have no chance of getting the job. If you're down to the final rounds of interviews, maybe it's you and several other people vying for that open spot at company XYZ, in the same way that our fear of bombing an interview might cause us to not do well and not get the job, could the fear of actually succeeding in the interview and being presented with a job offer that's going to be a really hard decision on whether you should take it or not, could that actually make you bomb the interview and prevent you from succeeding when you had all the chops, all the stories, all the experience to go and get that job? Because you might not know what to do if you did. In the interview process, at least, one of the things that we can do is stay present in what we're doing, focus on our preparation for that specific round of interviews only, or if you're deciding, okay, I'm going to apply for this job, it's a long shot, I have no idea if I'm going to get it, I am happy in my current role, but I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens because this looks like a really great opportunity that matches what I want and my skill set. Stay present in getting that resume up to date and getting LinkedIn up to date. You don't have to do any other work after you've applied unless someone tells you that there's a next step. So don't let the fear of success keep you from taking any action to move forward toward a goal you have, or perhaps a goal that you didn't realize you had until it was presented to you. I want to say a special thanks to Jason Gass for being a guest host with us, for bringing the book to our attention. I really enjoyed the discussions. It was a lot of fun. I know Jon enjoyed it as well. I'd love to hear what you think. We'd really appreciate it if you leave us a 5-star rating and write a review. What was the most helpful topic discussed? Did listening to this series of discussions make you want to read the book or not want to read the book? And of course, if you have any other types of feedback, you can always shoot us an email, nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear any book recommendations you might have for us to read on our own time or possibly review on the show. We'll be back next Tuesday, as usual. See you then.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.
I mean, if you know Morgan Freeman, that would be awesome.
Even if you don't, surely you could get a deep fake of his voice somehow, right?
This is what I'm thinking. Guys, like, we're just going to cut this part from the podcast, right? But our new app is going to be to license Morgan Freeman's voice. We'll get Morgan Freeman to, say a bunch of things and then have a bunch of like profound, reactions, stop shredding your work.
What if we just do that with your voice? I mean, you have a nice baritone. We could do that.
We won't start with Perfect and getting Morgan Freeman. We can start with me.
At least we'll start. Yeah.
Yeah.